What if I told you that the most powerful woman in 18th century Europe wasn't a queen, empress, or even born into nobility? What if the real puppet master pulling the strings of French politics, fashion, and international espionage was a fish merchant's daughter who seduced her way to the top and built an intelligence network that would make modern CIA operatives jealous? You think you know the story of royal mistresses, beautiful women lounging in silk, receiving jewelry, playing the role of decorative accessories to powerful men. But what you're about to discover about Madame de Pompadour will shatter everything you thought you knew about power, manipulation, and the deadly game of 18th century politics. This isn't just another tale of a pretty face catching a king's eye. This is the story of perhaps history's most brilliant female strategist, a woman who transformed from Jeanne Antoinette Poisson, daughter of a disgraced financier, into the unofficial Prime Minister of France. A woman who didn't just warm the royal bed, she controlled who lived, who died, and which nations went to war. The parallels to Game of Thrones aren't coincidental. George Martin himself drew inspiration from real historical figures, and Madame de Pompadour's story reads like the most twisted seasons of the series. Political intrigue, poisonings, spy networks, sexual manipulation, and power plays that determine the fate of millions. But here's what they don't teach you in history class. While everyone saw the glamorous mistress hosting elegant salons and commissioning beautiful art, behind the scenes she was orchestrating a shadow government that controlled everything from military appointments to international trade agreements. She had spies in every European capital, informants in every noble household, and enough dirt on powerful men to topple governments. By the end of this video, you'll understand why some historians argue she was more powerful than the king himself, and why her methods were so effective they're still studied by intelligence agencies today. Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because after today's revelation, you'll want to catch every deep dive we do into history's most dangerous power players. And drop a comment below. Who do you think was history's most underestimated female manipulator? Let's start with what everyone thinks they know about the world of French royal mistresses in the 1740s. Versailles was the epicenter of European culture and politics, a glittering palace where etiquette ruled supreme and the Sun King's legacy still cast its shadow over every courtly ritual. The system seemed straightforward enough. The King of France held absolute power, surrounded by an elaborate court hierarchy. Dukes, marquises, and counts jockeyed for position and royal favor. The queen maintained her ceremonial role, while royal mistresses, maîtresses en titre, held officially recognized positions with specific duties and privileges. This wasn't scandalous or hidden. French royal mistresses were institutionalized figures with apartments in the palace, annual pensions, and formal presentations at court. They were expected to be beautiful, cultured, and discreet. They hosted salons, patronized the arts, and provided the king with companionship and sophisticated conversation. Louis XV, who ruled France for nearly 60 years, was considered a capable monarch dealing with the complex challenges of governing Europe's most powerful nation. He managed costly wars, navigated intricate diplomatic relationships, and oversaw an elaborate bureaucracy that administered everything from colonial territories to domestic trade policies. The official story of Madame de Pompadour fits this mold perfectly. Born Jean Antoinette Poisson in 1721, she received an excellent education, married a wealthy tax farmer, and caught the king's attention at a masked ball in 1745. She became his official mistress, was granted the title Marquise de Pompadour, and settled into the traditional role of royal companion. Court observers noted her intelligence, her patronage of artists like Boucher and Fragonard, and her influence on fashion and decorative arts. She seemed to embody the Enlightenment ideals of the educated woman, well-read, cultured, and refined. Voltaire praised her support of philosophers and writers. The narrative was clean and comprehensible. A beautiful, intelligent woman rises through the social ranks to become the king's companion, using her position to promote the arts and culture. She appeared to be exactly what a royal mistress should be: elegant, supportive, and appropriately influential within her designated sphere. But this comfortable, sanitized version of events obscures the reality of what was actually happening behind Versailles' gilded doors. The truth is that what appeared to be a traditional mistress arrangement was actually the most sophisticated political operation in the 18th century Europe. And Madame de Pompadour wasn't just the king's lover, she was running France. While courtiers saw elegant dinner parties and artistic salons, Pompadour was conducting a parallel government that controlled military appointments, diplomatic negotiations, and domestic policy. Her weekly meetings with foreign ambassadors weren't social pleasantries. They were high-level political negotiations that determined international relations across Europe. She didn't just influence the king's decisions, she made them. Ministers reported to her before seeing Louis XV. Military commanders required her approval for promotions. She personally selected bishops, appointed governors, and controlled access to royal finances. When the Austrian ambassador needed to discuss treaty negotiations, he met with Pompadour, not the king. But the most shocking revelation is her spy network. While maintaining the facade of feminine domesticity, Pompadour operated an intelligence system that would be impressive by modern standards. She had paid informants in every European capital, intercepted diplomatic correspondence, and maintained detailed dossiers on everyone from foreign ministers to their servants. Her agents weren't just gathering gossip, they were conducting active espionage operations. French operatives in London reported on British naval movements. Informants in Vienna tracked Austrian military preparations. She knew about planned alliances, secret treaties, and military strategies before the governments involved had finalized them. The sexual element of her intelligence network was particularly ruthless. Pompadour recruited beautiful women and charming men to seduce key figures across Europe, extracting state secrets from bedrooms and private dinners. She turned the art of seduction into a weapon of statecraft, using human vulnerabilities to gather the information that kept France ahead of its rivals. Even more disturbing was her willingness to eliminate threats. While maintaining her reputation as a patron of arts and culture, she orchestrated the downfall of political opponents through calculated scandals, financial ruin, and in some cases, suspicious deaths. The Marquise de Maintenon's sudden illness after opposing one of Pompadour's policies. The convenient suicide of a finance minister who discovered irregularities in her accounts. Her control extended to what we would now recognize as propaganda operations. She didn't just commission art for aesthetic reasons. She used artists, writers, and intellectuals to shape public opinion and political discourse. The philosophical salons weren't just intellectual gatherings. They were carefully orchestrated influence campaigns designed to promote ideas that supported her political agenda. What makes this even more remarkable is that she accomplished all of this while navigating the incredibly restrictive social expectations of the 18th century women. She couldn't hold official government positions, couldn't inherit property independently, and was expected to defer to male authority in all public matters. Yet she built and operated a shadow government that controlled one of Europe's most powerful nations for nearly 20 years. Now let's examine how one woman managed to construct this incredible power structure by following the extraordinary life journey of Jeanne-Antoinette Poisson, who would transform herself into the most dangerous woman in Europe. Born in 1721 to François Poisson, a man whose financial dealings were questionable enough to eventually force him into exile, Jeanne-Antoinette's early life was marked by uncertainty and social climbing. Her mother, Louise Madeleine de la Motte, was rumored to have affairs with wealthy men to secure the family's position, and whispers at court suggested that Jeanne-Antoinette's real father might have been a tax farmer named Charles-François Paul Lenormand de Tournehem. Whether or not these rumors were true, Tournehem became Jeanne-Antoinette's protector and provided her with an education that was extraordinary for any woman of the era, let alone one from such a precarious social background. She studied literature, music, theater, and most unusually for a woman, politics and economics. She learned to speak multiple languages fluently and developed the sophisticated conversational skills that would later prove essential to her rise. At age 9, she was told by a fortune teller that she would one day capture the heart of a king. Whether this was genuine prophecy or careful manipulation by her ambitious mother, it became the driving force of her entire existence. Every lesson, every skill, every social connection was cultivated with this ultimate goal in mind. Her marriage to Charles-Guillaume Lenormand d'Étiolles in 1741 was a strategic move that provided her with wealth, social position, and crucially, access to the circles surrounding the royal court. But unlike other wealthy merchant wives who were content to host fashionable salons, Jeanne-Antoinette was methodically studying the personalities, weaknesses, and desires of everyone who might eventually provide her with access to the king. She researched Louis XV obsessively. She learned his favorite foods, his preferred conversation topics, his hunting schedules, even his sexual preferences. She practiced the exact tone of voice and style of wit that would appeal to him. She arranged for accidental encounters in the forest of Senart, where the king hunted, always ensuring she was perfectly dressed and positioned to catch his eye. The famous masked ball at Utrees Hall in February 1745 wasn't a chance meeting. It was the culmination of years of careful preparation. She appeared dressed as Diana the Huntress, a costume choice that was both symbolically perfect and calculated to appeal to the king's known preferences. Her conversation was brilliant enough to intrigue him, but never threatening enough to make him uncomfortable. But what happened after she became his mistress reveals the true scope of her ambitions. Within months, she had transformed from grateful recipient of royal favor to active political participant. She began attending council meetings, not as decoration, but as a contributor to discussions about military strategy and diplomatic policy. Her transformation of her living spaces reveals her strategic thinking. Her apartments weren't just luxuriously decorated, they were designed as centers of political power. She created private spaces where sensitive conversations could happen without observation, installed secret passages that allowed for discreet meetings, and established communication systems that allowed her to coordinate with her growing network of agents and informants. She understood that maintaining the king's interest required more than beauty or charm. She had to make herself indispensable by becoming his most trusted advisor, his primary source of information, and eventually, his closest political ally. She studied every document that crossed his desk, memorized the details of every diplomatic negotiation, and gradually positioned herself as the person he relied on for analysis and advice. Her intelligence and political acumen quickly became apparent to foreign diplomats who began bypassing traditional government ministers to negotiate directly with her. This wasn't because she was sleeping with the king. It was because she was more knowledgeable, better prepared, and more capable of delivering results than anyone else in the French government. What separated Pompadour from every other royal mistress in European history was her understanding that sexual influence was temporary, but political power, properly constructed, could be permanent. The most chilling aspect of Pompadour's rise to power became apparent in the 1750s, when her relationship with Louis XV evolved from passionate romance to something far more dangerous. A political partnership built on mutual dependence and shared secrets that could destroy them both. As her sexual relationship with the king naturally cooled over time, Pompadour faced the fate of every royal mistress throughout history: replacement by a younger, more beautiful woman. But instead of gracefully accepting dismissal and retirement to a country estate, she executed perhaps the most audacious power play in the history of European politics. She transformed herself from maîtresse en titre to something entirely new: the king's chief political advisor and intelligence coordinator, while simultaneously managing a stable of younger women to satisfy his sexual appetites. She essentially became a political pimp, selecting and training beautiful women to sleep with the king while she retained control over all matters of real importance. The infamous Parc aux Cerfs, a private house in Versailles where Louis XV conducted affairs with a succession of young women, wasn't just the king's personal pleasure palace. It was Pompadour's most brilliant strategic creation. She personally selected these women, often teenagers from impoverished backgrounds, trained them in the specific techniques that would please the king, and then monitored their conversations for any information that might be politically useful. But even more shocking was how she used these arrangements to gather intelligence on foreign powers. Several of these young women were actually foreign agents, planted by Pompadour to extract information from the king during intimate moments. She was essentially running a honey trap operation against the most powerful man in France, using his sexual appetites to advance French interests in international negotiations. Her espionage network reached its peak during the 7 Years' War, when she orchestrated what historians now call the diplomatic revolution. The complete realignment of European alliances that saw France ally with Austria against Prussia and Britain. This wasn't just diplomatic maneuvering. It was the result of years of intelligence gathering, strategic manipulation, and careful coordination with agents across multiple countries. The most documented example of her ruthlessness emerged during the Damien assassination attempt on Louis XV in 1757. While the official investigation focused on finding Damien's accomplices, Pompadour conducted her own parallel investigation using her spy network. What she discovered was that the assassination plot had connections to several court nobles who opposed her influence. Rather than expose these connections through legal channels, she systematically destroyed each conspirator through carefully orchestrated scandals, financial ruin, and social disgrace. The Comte de Broglie found himself accused of financial irregularities that cost him his fortune. The Duc de Richelieu discovered embarrassing personal correspondence had been leaked to satirical pamphlets. One minor nobleman, whose name has been lost to history, died under circumstances that were officially ruled suicide, but which Pompadour's private correspondence suggests were considerably more complicated. Her control over information became absolute. Foreign ambassadors reported that she knew the contents of their encrypted communications before their own governments received them. She maintained detailed files on the sexual preferences, financial vulnerabilities, and family secrets of virtually every important person in Europe. What's most disturbing is how she used this information. When the British were negotiating the Treaty of Paris to end the 7 Years' War, she possessed detailed intelligence about the British negotiators' personal weaknesses and used this information to extract more favorable terms for France than the military situation warranted. Her manipulation of religious politics was particularly sophisticated. While publicly supporting the Catholic Church, she secretly funded Enlightenment philosophers whose writings challenged traditional religious authority. She played both sides of religious controversies, gathering intelligence from religious leaders while supporting intellectual movements that undermined their power. The extent of her control only became clear in the final years of her life, when illness began to limit her activities. Government business that had functioned smoothly for decades began to break down. Diplomatic negotiations stalled. Intelligence operations failed. It became apparent that she hadn't just been influencing French policy. She had been personally managing the day-to-day operations of the French state. The final revelation of Madame de Pompadour's extraordinary life came in 1764 as she lay dying in her apartments at Versailles, still working to protect the networks and secrets that had made her the most powerful woman in Europe. Even on her deathbed, she continued coordinating political operations. Foreign ambassadors came to pay their respects, but these weren't courtesy visits. They were final negotiations with the woman who had shaped European politics for 2 decades. She used her last weeks to ensure the protection of her agents, the security of her most sensitive intelligence files, and the continued operation of the systems she had built. Her death created a power vacuum that no one could fill. Louis XV, who had relied on her political judgment for nearly 20 years, found himself unable to make decisions without her input. Government ministers who had reported to her for years suddenly had no clear chain of command. The intelligence network she had built began to collapse as agents lost their coordinating authority. But perhaps the most shocking discovery came when her private papers were examined after her death. Hidden in secret compartments throughout her apartments, investigators found evidence of operations that no one had suspected during her lifetime. Detailed plans for the invasion of Britain, financial records showing she had been secretly funding anti-British activities in the American colonies years before the American Revolution began. correspondence with Chinese merchants suggesting she had been exploring the possibility of a French-Chinese alliance against British interests in Asia. Most disturbing of all were the personal dossiers she maintained on members of the royal family itself. She had been gathering compromising information on princes, princesses, and even the Queen, apparently as insurance against potential threats to her position. These files contain details about extramarital affairs, financial irregularities, and political sympathies that could have destroyed careers and destabilized the monarchy. The extent of her financial operations also shocked investigators. She hadn't just been managing her own wealth. She had been secretly controlling significant portions of French government finances, directing money to political allies, funding intelligence operations, and maintaining slush funds that allowed her to respond quickly to political opportunities. Her influence on the American Revolution became clear only decades later, when American historians discovered that many of the French policies that supported American independence had been planned by Pompadour years before her death. Her intelligence network had identified British vulnerabilities in North America and developed strategies for exploiting them that were implemented long after she was gone. The assassination attempts against her were more numerous and serious than anyone realized during her lifetime. Her private correspondence revealed at least 6 separate plots to poison or otherwise kill her, orchestrated by various European powers who recognized her as a threat to their interests. She had survived not through luck, but through a sophisticated personal security apparatus that included food tasters, bodyguards, and counterintelligence operations. Most remarkably, she had been preparing for the possibility of Louis XV's death and had developed contingency plans for maintaining her influence during the transition to a new king. These plans included compromising material on Louis XVI, strategic alliances with powerful noble families, and financial resources that would have allowed her to remain a political force even after losing her connection to the throne. Her final act was perhaps her most audacious. Sensing that her death was imminent, she arranged for the destruction of her most sensitive files, while ensuring that carefully selected information would be preserved to protect her legacy and maintain some level of protection for her surviving agents and allies. The immediate aftermath of Pompadour's death demonstrated just how completely she had transformed the nature of political power in the 18th century Europe, and her influence continues to shape our understanding of intelligence operations and political manipulation even today. Within months of her death, the carefully balanced European alliance system she had constructed began to collapse. The diplomatic revolution she had orchestrated started to unravel as her successors lacked both her intelligence capabilities and her sophisticated understanding of European power dynamics. France's position in international negotiations weakened significantly without her behind-the-scenes maneuvering. The most immediate impact was on French colonial policy. Pompadour had been secretly coordinating with American colonial leaders for years before her death, laying groundwork for French support of American independence. Her intelligence network in North America had identified key figures who could be influenced and had developed strategies for undermining British colonial authority. These operations continued after her death and became crucial to the success of the American Revolution. Modern intelligence historians have identified Pompadour as one of the earliest practitioners of techniques that became standard in the 20th century espionage. Her use of sexual entrapment, financial leverage, and information warfare prefigured methods used by agencies like the CIA, KGB, and Mossad. Several Cold War operations were explicitly modeled on strategies she had developed 2 centuries earlier. Her influence on the development of feminist political theory is equally significant but often overlooked. She proved that women could exercise supreme political power even within systems designed to exclude them entirely. Her methods of building parallel power structures, manipulating traditional gender roles to gain access to male-dominated spaces, and using intelligence networks to overcome institutional disadvantages became templates studied by women's rights activists and female political leaders throughout history. The financial systems she developed for managing political operations influenced the development of modern political fundraising and campaign finance. Her techniques for raising money from private sources, channeling funds to political allies, and maintaining financial flexibility for rapid response to political opportunities establish patterns that persist in contemporary politics. What remains most mysterious is the full extent of her international networks. Documents continue to surface in archives across Europe, revealing previously unknown connections and operations. Recent discoveries in Russian state archives suggest she may have been in communication with Catherine the Great years before Catherine's rise to power. Chinese historical records indicate possible diplomatic contact that preceded official Franco-Chinese relations by decades. Perhaps most intriguingly, several historians now argue that many political developments in the decades following her death can be traced to seeds she planted during her lifetime. The patterns of alliance and conflict that shaped the Napoleonic era, the specific form taken by the French Revolution, and even some aspects of 19th century colonial expansion followed blueprints that appear to have originated in her strategic planning. Her story serves as a reminder that the most powerful people in history are often those whose influence remains hidden from public view. While kings and queens receive public recognition, the real decisions were being made by someone whose name doesn't appear in most history textbooks, but whose fingerprints can be found on virtually every major political development of the 18th century. The techniques she pioneered continue to be relevant in our current era of information warfare, social media manipulation, and global intelligence operations. Her understanding that information, properly used, could be more powerful than armies or wealth remains as applicable today as it was 250 years ago. And here's the most unsettling thought. If one woman could exercise this level of hidden influence in an era of limited communication and transportation, what might be possible for similar figures operating with modern technology and global connectivity? That's something worth thinking about as you navigate our current political landscape. If you found this deep dive into hidden power structures fascinating, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We've got more shocking historical revelations coming that will change how you see everything from ancient empires to modern governments. And drop a comment below. What other historical figures do you suspect wielded more power than the official records suggest? The